So in the nonprofit world, right, they don't have contacts and deals. That tends to be members. It's a different set of nomenclature than B2B or B2C company, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And definitely speak in their language too, because to your point, it's definitely a different space. They have a different set of concerns, a different set of priorities. So things like ROI they're important, but they're not as important in the nonprofit space. And so, you really have to know how to position it specific to that industry. I would say that's not unique to the nonprofit space. I think every industry have to approach a little differently. There's a key difference between like nonprofit and let's say your standard B2B or B2C prospect.
Yes. There's some key differences, buying cycle being one of them. But I think the recent win, I believe it was one of those ones, it wasn't a single team, single tool evaluation here. Give us some background on how they came in, the challenges, and what that looked like, and how you ended up navigating that initial conversation with them.
Yeah. For the sake of this conversation, for the sake of confidentiality, we'll allude to the company, but this is a major nonprofit we were working with. They actually had worked with us on a smaller scale before. So they already were familiar with us on the marketing side of things. We were included in a CRM eval, and it was between us and Salesforce. I think we're still like very much the upstart in the CRM space, I think. I think Salesforce has an overwhelmingly large amount of market share. So it's great. Again, as somebody who worked here when we were in an incubator, it's great to see us now brought to the table with Salesforce. But anyway, that aside, when we started the conversation, it was very clear that this was more of an internal comms play than it was like donor marketing or volunteer engagement, like things that things very often were pulled into in the nonprofit space on the marketing side of things. That was number one. Number two, it was very clear, lots of different constituencies, like we talked about before. So we had the system admins, we had the InfoSec folks, we had the folks who were actually in charge of working with different partners outside of the nonprofit. And so it was, again, a matter of telling a story that resonated with the core user, but also addressed some of the bigger problems they were having on the system side and the data consistency side of things.
When you first got involved, what did you find was broken or missing, I guess, from their perspective? And what did they think they needed versus what they actually needed in the end that you were able to take them down that path?
The issue they had is they had a bunch of different divisions that were involved in connecting with partner organizations that they worked with. And each of these divisions had their own CRM or their own system, whatever it was, like Airtable, spreadsheets, Monday.com. A couple were using Salesforce. One was using us. And the issues that they were running into were primarily around coordination, because what would happen is, let's say two teams were in touch with the same outside partner. They would both be communicating with that person unaware of the other person's communications. And so very often they were stepping on each other's toes. They were creating confusion, over communicating. It wasn't the best look. And so they really wanted to consolidate that under one platform to solve the issue. I think one of the things I've noticed about the CRM space in general is that even today, for a lot of larger organizations, it's still an IT-driven process. And so in a lot of cases, you have people looking at it from more of an IT perspective and more of an issue of, does this solve the problem of unifying data? How do we deal with security? How do we deal with user permissions? All that stuff. A lot of times what they miss in that process is this something the team is actually going to be able to use. And the good news here is they were already aware that user adoption was going to be a big deal. And so that was really where we were able to come in and ultimately win this, because from just a clear nuts and bolts functional perspective, Salesforce or HubSpot could do the job, but Salesforce was going to require 10 more admins and 100 additional clicks to get the same thing done in HubSpot. And I think ultimately where we went out was just, number one, it was going to be way easier to administer it, way easier to implement it. And it was also going to be way easier for the end users to adopt. We weren't talking about non-technical folks, but we weren't talking about folks who necessarily wanted to live and breathe in a CRM either. They just wanted something easy that they could get their job done in.
Was the ease of use sale, is that what they came in with, or is that something that you guys directed them towards, or did they come in with that expectation?
They came in with concerns more about adoption.
Okay.
And I think ease of use, we were able to bridge that into ease of use. Everybody has a story about this particular platform or piece of software that they purchased, and then nobody ever used it. It's like the proverbial piece of exercise 100%. Equipment with your laundry hanging off it. Everybody always has an adoption problem or an adoption story with some software. We bought this, nobody ever used it. And sometimes people understand that means ease of use, sometimes people don't. And so I think a lot of times it's up to us to say, hey, the big issue you're going to have with adoption is making sure people understand how to use it. I think they were a little friendlier to it because they already had teams that were in quote unquote easy to use tools. So Monday.com, for example, really easy to use, or Pipedrive, really easy to use. And it's just the problem with those tools is they just don't scale. And so I think one of the advantages we have, I don't want this to turn to a HubSpot infomercial, but you can't stop me. I'm hardwired for it. One of the advantages we have is that we have that ease of use, but we also allow folks to scale.
Yep. I know different stakeholders in the deal, ease of use and adoption, right? Communicating how that translates to platforms, depending on where that stakeholder sits, can mean different things. Walk me through, I guess, what that stakeholder mix was and who was the final decision maker and what the challenges were with the mix of folks that you were chatting with.
I'm going to come out and confess right off the bat. I have no idea who the final decision maker was. I have zero idea. I tried to suss that out. I think it was a decision by committee. And I think that's again, something different about nonprofit. I think they tend to be a little bit more consensus driven than B2B orgs, B2C orgs, private companies, which again, will work by committee, but ultimately, typically there's somebody who's going to put their stamp of approval on it. These folks were definitely way more consensus driven. And the mix was project managers. So folks who were actually going to be in charge of getting people onboarded. That was number one. Number two, we had your IT InfoSec folks, and they were most concerned with how is this going to integrate with our systems, what kind of user permissioning was there, data protection, all that good stuff. And then we had folks in the middle who were, let's call them like systems admins. And these were the folks who are ultimately going to be responsible for keeping the thing humming. And so what we did with this particular deal is we really broke that up into a couple of different calls. So like IT InfoSec had their own call. To answer all their questions. Oddly enough, we had more calls over their concerns than we did with the project managers. Right. The CRM side of things was pretty easy to get done. And then it turned into the wiring underneath. So things like user permissions, integration, stuff like that.